All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol. A very special guest with us today, Jean-Paul Bourgeois. He is a Cajun chef who spent about a decade in New York and then kind of went home around the time of the pandemic, and is also a pretty well-known content creator. Is one of the contributors to the MeatEater team. And I think, is Duck Camp Dinners in its second season now?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me. Duck Camp Dinners is in its second season. This is, in a lot of ways, in its second season, but in my head, the full first season, meaning that it's 8 episodes, all 22 to 25 minutes long. I mean, they're just deep and in depth. And the first season was great. Did it really well, but some were 12 minutes, some were 18 minutes, a couple were 22 minutes. And then, so we really tried to tighten it up for this season and make it one of those like, all right, this can live in a lot of different places if we wanted to.
I found the program super watchable. I'm not, like, I'll fully admit, I'm not a waterfowl hunter. But maybe for people who haven't seen it, give us like the elevator pitch, because it's a really cool concept for a show. And I don't think you have to be necessarily a diehard hunter to love watching the show.
Yeah, my one sentence elevator pitch has always been the life cycle of the duck camp through the food we eat and the people we share it with. And for season 1, like, we start off going to the grocery store, going to the butcher's market, packing out coolers, packing out gear, getting to the camp, doing that whole thing, and then finish out season 1 with like bringing catfish and ducks home to my parents' house and doing a cook there. And to me, we really wanted to authentically tell that life cycle of that place. And I think the reason why you thought it was very easily watchable, even though not being a waterfowl hunter, is for the same reason that you see a lot in the comment section, is that no matter what your pursuit is, or where that pursuit happens, you likely have a group of friends or family that go to a certain place. Could be a campsite, could be a physical structure, could be a place that you'll rent every year and go fly fishing and so on. But it seems like a lot of outdoorsmen all have these places that we share with the people that we love and other outdoorsmen. And I think that's what makes it so relatable to waterfowl hunters, non-waterfowl hunters, shoot, even hunters and non-hunters. You know, we see a lot of just people who never even held a gun that love the show. So I think that's just one. And I think what they maybe get out of it is just they feel this raw authenticity around these people that truly love a place. Like, that can't be faked. You know, you can script and write and plan and so on, but you can't fake a true love for a place or a love for something that you do. And that's the kind of people that we like to tell stories around.
I think there's something special that happens at hunt camp. So my old man is coming in. So I'm in BC, Canada, on the West Coast, lots of mountains, lots of hunting. And my old man lives in Ontario, which is kind of like a Canadian Michigan, a little bit of everything, but a little bit flatter. And he's coming out next week. He's going to be here for 10 days for an elk hunt. It'll be my brother's first hunt. My dad's come out one time before. And even just watching the show took me back. So I kind of grew up moose hunting in Ontario with my dad's camp. So grandpa, 2 uncles, and moose tags are incredibly hard to come by in Ontario. So it's normally like 15 dudes in a camp hunting one tag. Mm-hmm. And there's something special about hunt camp. You know, you got guys busting chops, like, you know, none of the, and I don't want to make it like just a guy thing, but like the wife and the kids stay at home. So everybody kind of gets this chance to get away. And like, you can't watch your show for 5 minutes before you're like, I don't know those guys, but I know those guys, you know, like they're the same guys that I hang out with. They're just different guys.
100%, man. 100%. And that's why, you know, again, we just feel like there's so much runway with this show to take it into other places, into other camps, because we hear that over and over again. And that's one of those things we didn't intend on connecting with people, but it did organically. And we're seeing the repercussions in a good way of it, just with a following like that. You know, I would agree with you. In the beginning of Duck Camp Dinners, in its infancy stages, it was a selfish kind of content play that I wanted to make for my, you know, so I always had this memory of this place, and I always had this recollection of all these jokes and the banter and the, you know, giving folks a hard times and just being with friends. I wanted to document that. I wanted to always have it. And I want my friends to always have it. And it grew into something bigger than even that, which I'm extremely proud of. And one of those things is that being the first 2 seasons in Louisiana, we see an incredible amount of support from our home state saying, thank y'all for making something authentic. Thank you for making something that we can be proud of, because there's so much media kind of on the other side of the spectrum that kind of makes characterizations of Louisianians or Southerners. Yeah. And I was frankly tired of it. And I wanted to create a show that really was able to battle that and conflict with that. And in the process, we ended up making kind of this cult following of people that, one, if you're from Louisiana, we're extremely proud of. And two, folks like yourself who saw themselves in our group of friends, in that camp, in that food, in that storytelling, in that pursuit, even if it was completely different. And I just think that translates incredibly well to people and places and pursuits and foods from all over, not just the country, not just North America, but the world. I mean, we really see that over and over again. And our job is my job is not to be the technical hunter. I am not. Like, I'm a waterfowler. I like to wing shoot. I have some expertise when it comes to that, especially in Louisiana. But like, I'm about as new hunter as it gets. It's probably some of your listeners when it comes to just whitetail hunting. I killed my first whitetail 4 years ago. I killed my first turkey last year. I've just always waterfowl hunted. And so although I've been doing that since I was 9 years old, along with some small game like squirrel and rabbit and quail and dove and so on, I still feel like a new hunter when I go into these other deer camps and, just learning the ins and outs of that. So there's certain things that I can relate to on the other side with other folks.
Now, I think another thing that makes this show so attractive to me, like I've had this recent fascination with the Bayou, and I think it's probably because, the MeatEater crew went down there and did a couple podcast episodes, and it's one of my favorite places to hunt in the world is the Southwest. I love Arizona and New Mexico and Texas, and it's because it's in direct contrast. Like, I live in mountainous rainforests, like it's completely polar opposite, and I think the same thing could be said of the Bayou. Like, I don't even have a frame of reference. Like, it just seems like such a crazy, there's all these weird animals and like different fish and different cooking. And even like the boats people are getting around on, everybody's got these floating camps. Like, it's alien for people who aren't from there. Could you maybe share a little bit about what is that culture down there? And how does waterfowling in these camps kind of play into that and impact that kind of Bayou culture?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question and great observation, and one that is not lacking in today's culture. I think a lot of people see what you see in Louisiana, and as a Louisianian, I can say honestly, and I think most of my state brethren would say that they probably taken it for granted for most of their life. In Louisiana, where I grew up specifically, I could roll out of bed, be at a boat launch in 15 minutes, and be at a duck blind in another 15 minutes, and then be at work at 9 a.m. if I wanted to. My dad did that for years. He was a lawyer, and he would go, he once clocked 58 out of 60 days of duck hunting, and he would go right into the courtroom right after that. And he was diehard like that for about a decade. That's something that I'm not sure where else you can go in the country and have that type of access to waterfowl, or to, and I just don't even mean waterfowl. We could have done that with whitetail, even though they're like swamp bucks, not the same as, still whitetail, but not the same as, your big racks that you might get in West Texas or throughout Kansas and Missouri and so on. But same with freshwater fishing. Shoot, an hour from my house where I grew up, I'm in salt water, and I can go red fishing, speckled trout and flounder. Then I can get out into the beginning rigs to go grouper, snapper, wahoo, blackfin tuna, and so on. It's just, I think that's why it garners the name the Sportsman's Paradise. It's on the back of our license. It's on our license plates. And I think it's just because of that access to wildlife. As far as how waterfowl comes into play in our world. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting conflict there. A lot of it is private land owned by oil and gas companies or state that we have to lease. Not a whole lot of public land. I shouldn't say that. There's not a whole lot of productive public land anymore, and that's a lot due to environmental issues that we have with coastal erosion, saltwater intrusion, the land sinking because there's no more freshwater grass infrastructure that's really holding that saltwater marsh together. There's a big conflict that happens when salt meets fresh and creates brackish, and then the repercussions of that is less feed, more open water, and obviously we're at the mercy of a lot of migration patterns and so on being this far south. It's like there's a whole lot of cold stuff that needs to happen before birds show up. And so, but because we're so water heavy where I'm from, I mean, if you look at a map in Google Maps and you pull that up, it's going to look like, oh yeah, Thibodaux, Louisiana, look at all that land. But when you bring up the satellite and see how the topography kind of relates to those maps, you're like, oh wait, this is a lot of inhabitable marshland, uninhabitable marshland, excuse me. And it makes great ecosystem and habitats for waterfowl, again, making it so easier for South Louisianians like me to hunt them. But truly, you hear this over and over the last, generation or two. And it's changed, and it's changed for the worse in most parts. Mm-hmm. We're still lucky where we hunt mostly to have things like ringnecks, canvasbacks, redheads, a few widgeons, some blue-winged teal, and so on. For the most part, the divers have taken over because of just the mass amount of water that even exists now compared to 30 years ago. Again, that has a lot to do with natural disasters like hurricanes that continue to kind of roll through the area and tear up marshland and so on. So, like most areas in the world where man confronts nature, there's this conflict there that happens. And same in Louisiana, again, like love the oil gas community because that most of my friends, most of my family, they work in some sort. Like you can't hate that, but you can also, something to say about, okay, well, what has that industry done to our habitats? And it's not one finger to point and blame at anyone, but it is a part of the conversation. And so there's a conflict there. It's an interesting relationship between hunter and way of life and how to make a living in the outdoors that you love, because they kind of battle against each other. They don't really mesh. They more like just friction and spark and so on. And I think every hunter, every Louisiana might have a different take on that, but we can all agree in Louisiana, for the most part, unless we got a really good spot and you pay a lot of money for it, that the hunting has changed and mostly not for the better.
If I didn't know you weren't from BC, I'd almost think you were, because we are facing the exact same challenges. And in addition to oil and gas, you got to throw in the logging companies up here. And now it's not quite the same situation as the States because it's illegal to lease land for hunting rights up here. So you can do it on a handshake. You can give people permission to come on your land. There's lots of like draw elk tags that take place on forestry land. You'll need to write in and get a letter of consent, but they can't charge you any money for it. But as far as the conflict between the two, we just had a huge thing go down with our moose and caribou rights in kind of the northeast quadrant of BC. And they did this big study, and the oil and gas has had such an impact on the herds up there that some of the native communities are, I don't want to use the word complaining, but basically voicing that their traditional subsistence use is being impacted because the herds aren't big enough anymore. So they took away a lot of resident hunters' rights up there. And a lot of people are up in arms because it's like, well, you're telling us it's not from the hunting, it's from the oil and gas, but you're letting the oil and gas keep doing what they're doing and you're taking away the hunting rights. And however, in the same breath, you can't go hunting in this province without driving down a logging road to get there.
Yeah.
Like if it hadn't have been for industry, we wouldn't even have access. It would just be this impenetrable mountainous nothingness that none of us would ever be able to get to. So very similar here. It's like we owe them on one hand and then trying to figure out, and I was a forestry engineer for 15 years. I worked in the logging industry. I'm pro industry, but I'm also pro compromise, like figuring out a way for different parties, like multiple stakeholders to all have use to a given resource. Because I do think it's gotten a little bit out of hand in the last few years and people have gotten a little bit aggressive with the resource extraction and whatnot.
Yeah. I tell you what, man, you just said something that I've heard from people in the Chesapeake Bay, that you hear all along the East Coast. It's another reason that we think like duck camp dinners, it allowed us to look at this whole area and region and industry and conflict through the lens of the duck camp. We can say the same thing by going to Chesapeake or going to Vancouver or going to places in like coastal Florida where there's a lot of issues with spillage going into the Gulf and different things. Like there's these stories all around the country that deserve a story, deserve a spotlight, if you will. And it's not to condemn and it's not to point the finger and who's right or who's wrong. It's to hopefully come with that compromise to where those stakeholders, like you mentioned, I love the way you put that, can all have access to this resource. In Louisiana, for example, like back when they levied off the Mississippi River, that river would rise and flood and disperse silt throughout through all the Mississippi Delta, which created this incredible fertile agricultural soil. Right. It was just rich. Waterfowl loved it, habitat, any type of wildlife loved it. But now they've levied that, and so all of that land doesn't have a replenishing of that silt. Now we're never going to unlevy the Mississippi River. Right. We did that so people can actually have homes that didn't flood twice a year. Right. So it was like for good reason that we did it, but we didn't understand the consequences 100 years ago when we did. And now we're trying to not change course, but just trying to like pump sediment from 100 miles to go into another tributary. And I love the effort, but like, it's just not going to replace what the Mississippi River did. And I guess that's part of the compromise, right? Like we're not going to not levy. We're not going to break the levees of the Mississippi River, guys. So what's the compromise here? So we're seeing a lot of state and federal funds that go into rebuilding marshlands. It's an uphill battle, I think, not just for Louisianans, but for anybody that's struggling with the same kind of environmental issues around the country.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's backtrack a little bit. You talked a little bit about starting a duck hunt when you were 9, your old man being a very passionate waterfowler. What was it like being a kid growing up in Louisiana? What was it? Was it a family thing? Duck hunting? Did you guys have a camp? Was it like an uncle that had a camp or something? What did that look like?
Really interesting. My dad, we always had a mud boat. We always had a place to duck hunt. We always had shotguns and decoys and waterfowl camo and so on. But he didn't like to deer hunt. We didn't have a fishing boat. And one thing that's really neat about Louisianans is, so my family was deep into waterfowl hunting, and we would trade ducks for deer meat, or ducks for rabbit, or ducks for whatever, or ducks for redfish. Yeah. And it becomes this like very community driven bartering marketplace when you're an outdoorsman, because my dad loved to fish, but maybe he didn't find a value into having a bay boat, whatever his case was, but he loved to eat fish. And so how would you do that? Well, we have ducks from 58 days straight of hunting. Maybe that we create, and it's kind of this, not unorganized, I wouldn't say, but it wasn't intentional
informal
bartering system, right? I thought that was really cool. My wife and I talk about this often, because we have a newborn who you met a little
Yep.
bit before we started, and I can remember as a little boy, me and my best friend, when we were 8, 9 years old, used to drag a pirogue, which is a flat bottom skiff, and we call it similar to a canoe,
Okay.
but we call it a pirogue. It's flat bottom skiff. 8 or 9 years old with two fishing poles, a little igloo ice chest,
Yeah. Yeah.
and haul it across the 2 acres of yard that we have across a really busy highway and launch it ourselves into the bayou and spend 8, 9 hours paddling by ourselves. And we weren't even 10 years old,
Yeah.
fishing for perch and catfish and little largemouth bass that we can catch on worms. Um, we would tie up on the pillars underneath this little bridge that would cross, and we would just perch jerk there for hours. And I think back, I was like, man, am I going to feel comfortable enough as a parent to
Right.
let my child at 8 and 9 years old go out in the water by themselves with no
Yeah.
life jackets, mind you? Like,
Yeah.
we just paddled. It's like we weren't in a motorized thing, but we would set jug lines for catfish that we would make out of 2-liter Coke bottles and butcher twine and a eagle claw hook, and catch catfish and bring it back. And my dad would clean them, and we'd have a little fish fry at 8, 9, 10 years old. That's how we grew up.
Right.
I can remember my first BB gun to first pellet gun to first air rifle to first shotgun. I remember them all, and I remember everything I shot with them too. And that was just walking around my backyard and in the headlands, that made kind of the pecan groves and oak groves that bordered the sugarcane fields where I grew up. And we would walk them and shoot squirrels on a still day, and we would run dogs for rabbits. Run dogs for rabbits during the spring and fall. And I don't remember like I don't remember watching TV as a kid unless like I had to stay home from school and my mom, under certain
Yeah.
circumstances. You know what I mean? Like I just don't remember that. And I say the same thing about food. Like I never remember a pizza box on the table. I don't remember like boxes of fried chicken or microwave dinners or any of that. It was always what came out the freezer, and what came out the freezer were ducks or things that we bartered for, like speckled trout and redfish and deer and wild hog and rabbits and so on. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was normal. Why wouldn't anybody do this? Why doesn't
Right.
everybody do this? And I realized very quickly once I got, into college and started meeting people from other places, and then I moved out of Louisiana. Then my head started to explode big time on just culturally the differences of how I grew up and how others, again, not one better than the other, just like open eyes, clear eyes about like, whoa, that was maybe I grew up in something pretty special, kind of special there.
Yeah. So then where does the love of cooking come from? Was it a particular individual that you were tight with? Is it something you always had, or did you develop it later on in life?
My dad was a great, so the men in Louisiana are often great cooks, and you see that in duck camp dinners season one and
100%.
two.
And I loved how each of the guys had like their dish. And there's the one guy in particular, when you knew he was cooking, like you just didn't worry because he always, brought the heat. Like I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we believe that exists in every camp across the country. Like most of us
Yeah.
have, you probably have in your moose camp, like the guy who's cooks most of the time,
Yeah.
like kind of responsible for making sure the coolers are got the right things in them. And so Louisiana, that's very common. My dad was a great cook. He cooked on Saturdays, Sundays. My mom cooked every day. And I think just being raised in a culture and community that really valued the dinner table and valued what was on it, it brought this innate kind of ability for me to understand food on a different level, to acknowledge its importance in our culture. And at a very young age, I was experimenting with cooking like 7, 8, 9 years old, at my parents' side by myself, like putting my own things together on a very, very rudimentary and primal way for an eight,
Hmm.
9 year old. But those are some of my most vivid memories as a child revolve around food and around people that are sharing it. I can't remember my first day of elementary school or the picture that everybody shows me of my best friend in first grade, but I can remember what my mom used to cook. And I think a lot of that is just a product of my environment. And when I started doing it, even at a young age, I realized one, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the process of cooking from start to finish. I enjoyed that it was something I can get satisfaction from. And later on, I consider, in my life, I now consider it like as an art form. But back
100%.
then, I was like, this is something I can get satisfied from, but it only lasts for 10 or 15 minutes and then it's gone. And then
Yeah.
you got to redo it. And it's not like a work of art like you see here. It doesn't, it's not just done and it lives forever. It's gone. I kind of think there's something elusive about that and that which makes that special. It's no different from hearing a turkey gobble and thinking that you're going to go cut it off, and then he's tight-lipped, and that's the chase, right? And in a lot of ways, maybe I draw parallels into my chase for the outdoors and the chase for that same satisfaction every time I cook. Again, later in life, I kind of more considered it an art form and seeing it as like, this is something that I can create for people to be happy from, but it only lasts for a finite amount of time. And I think that's kind of cool. But I would say it's always been with me. When I went to college, when I went to culinary school, I went to culinary school at the college I got a bachelor's of science degree at.
Okay.
And during orientation, they were like, choose a major. And I was like, what the hell am I going to do? And I went to psychology. And I quickly realized in orientation day that wasn't for me. And I can remember vividly passing by the culinary school and kind of looking at it and like, well, I never thought about becoming a chef or being in food and beverage, but I know I'm a good cook, because what happened throughout my like elementary and high school years, we didn't have a hunting camp, but we always went to hunting camps, friends' hunting camps. We didn't have a fishing camp, but we were always at fishing camps, lake camps, and so on. And my dad was always the cook at these camps. And then I became the cook at these camps.
Right.
And that's how I learned to cook. I learned how to cook from finding resourcefulness in the freezers that nobody has touched for 6 months or a year,
Right.
or the spice cabinet full of canned vegetables or old spices. I mean, I learned how to create what I thought was good food at that time from kind of nothing. And that's how that journey started. Then I kind of formalized it through culinary school, and then the rest was history.
So, and I can relate a lot, man. I do all the big, I actually do most of the cooking at home, but specifically like the big gathering cookings. Like we have the biggest house of the family, so it tends to be like Christmas over here and birthdays over here and stuff. And there's nothing like putting out that spread, man. I got a Traeger maybe a year and a half ago, and it's like I live on that thing, man.
Yeah.
Like I love bringing in like a couple big tri-tips, and like everybody's all mouths are watering, and then you're watching it disappear. And it's funny, I don't even get hungry half the time because I'm like so involved in making it and watching everybody else eat it. But it's also one of those things that really, like, it's very cyclical. Like it provides this reinforcement that like what you're doing is good and positive, and you're creating like this happiness in other people's lives, and it makes you want to do it more, and then you get better at it, and then people get even happier. Like, and I think it's, especially in today's day and age, we don't have so many areas where we're so physically connected to the people around us. Like, I'm going to make it, then you're going to eat it. Like, I'm providing you nourishment. It's going to make your body feel good. You get happy. Now I feel good. Like it's like an intimacy or like a connection that I don't know how many other places in our life we get that other than, sharing food and sharing fellowship with, family, friends, and all the rest.
100%. Ramsey Russell and I were talking about this the other day on his podcast. And one of the things that I was discussing with him was just like the community around the duck blind. Yeah. And you mentioned it about the camp, right? Like you can find that same kind of community in the camp. You can find that same kind of community in the dinner table. You can find the same community around music. Like I kind of love going to concerts. I've grown to be have some really good friends in the industry, and I'll go to their concerts and sit kind of in center stage. And what I like to do, I watch the concert, but I also like to turn back and just watch everybody just soak it in and freaking go ape shit over it.
100%.
And I think they feed off that same energy, the same energy that you feed off of, even though it may just be with 8 or 10 people with your family. It's the same energy that musicians provide. The same is like one thing I love about waterfowl hunting is that there's not a lot of other pursuits that I can get into a blind or a pit blind or A-frame or a boat with 3, 4, 8, sometimes 16 of my friends and hunt. It's a very communal pursuit. You rarely ever go waterfowl hunting by yourself.
Right.
Rarely do it with 2 people. You know, you're usually with 3 or 4 folks, usually your friends or family. And, you know, when the birds aren't flying, you got each other. I said this when we threw an episode 1 premiere party in my hometown bar for Duck Camp Dinner season 2.
I love it.
It was really a good time.
Oh, I bet.
One of the things I said when I addressed the crowd that was there, I said, look, if you're a waterfowl hunter, especially in Louisiana, you're going to have more bad years than good years. And the weather's going to suck a lot of times. And you may only kill a few birds, or you may not kill no birds. I said, so you better do this, because you're going to have your sucky years. Find yourself a group of friends, some family that you can share these moments with, because the hunting's going to suck sometimes, but as long as you got the right people in your circles, you'll always be out there in that pursuit because you'll have them. And I just think it's incredibly important, not just for waterfowl hunters, but for every hunter to find their like people that when you go to these places, you can't change the weather. You can't control the ducks, but you can control the people that you hang out with. And make sure that's good people, man. Make sure you want to share a table with them. You want to break bread with them. If you know, I don't know. I don't go to camps where I've decided a long time ago, if I lose sleep or if I think about something at night and it keeps me up, then like I'm out. I'll separate myself out of there. It's just not worth my mental state, mental capacity. I got too many good things in my life to have one person or a group of people that I don't really mesh with kind of ruin my day. So I think it's important that we all find, you know, that community within the community. We always talk about like the waterfowl community, the elk hunting, the mule deer community, the whatever community, but like, it's really important to find those people that you want to spend camp with and like look forward to go and spend camp with. And that we're all pulling our weight, that we're all adding something to the pot, if you will, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I do a lot of solo hunting, and I just got back from 2 weeks in the mountains chasing sheep by myself. And I almost see like a reverse evolution with myself. Like I came back into hunting kind of in my late 30s after being out of it for 20 years and doing it with my teens with my old man. And I was so focused on like the epic adventure of it all and trying to kill something with big horns and going as far as I could, as long as I could, that it was all very like, and it's okay too, but it was all very selfishly driven. Like it was the adventure I was going to go have. And I couldn't find a lot of people that wanted to keep up or who were interested in that type of hunting. So I just ended up doing it all by myself. But the longer I do it now, the more important I see that sense of community is. And it's kind of like, I'm pretty lucky to have 4 or 5, maybe 6 big hunts every year. And at the beginning of the year, I try and look at the calendar and be like, okay, here's my 1 or 2 like hardcore solo hunts. Now, how am I going to fill up that other bucket? How am I going to fill up that fellowship bucket? So I need to think. And one thing I haven't been great at is like mentoring new hunters. Not that I'm some big expert, but I know enough that I can take you in the woods for a couple days and you're not going to die. And we're going to have a good time and you're going to come back out. And I feel like I need to go with you. That's right. Yeah. And I owe it to the community because like I learned from other people. And I think sometimes it's possible to get lost in like the search or the quest for like the next big thing, that sometimes it's not about that. You know what I mean? And I just got off the phone with my business partner before I hopped on this podcast, and he was reminding me, remember when your dad and your brother are here, this is more about a week or two for like you guys to go away and spend time. And I haven't seen him since before the pandemic because he lives on the other side of the country. And it's like maybe the times at camp are even more important than the times out of camp, because it's more about the fellowship and spending time with your family and your loved ones. And I'm just saying this because I like to remind myself that I need to intentionally put those things in my calendar, or I'll get lost in maybe things that aren't quite as important for things that seem more important at the time.
Yeah. I think those people also like center you, right? Like they kind of bring you back to a reality that if you don't, like, you're just going to be on this constant search for this elusive, whether it's a physical pursuit or just you getting out there and just testing your physical and mental ability to actually do it. And I think coming back into a place that is just fun, that you can just have a conversation with people and have fights with people, like just be a human again.
Yeah.
You know, I work a lot with MeatEater, right? You mentioned that, but I'm not a technical like person. And in the hunting world, I get what a lot of what they do, they need to be, because they're by themselves and they're in pursuits and environments that are legitimately dangerous. And I don't do that. I would love to do that. I just was never exposed to that. And like you just said, like, I need a mentor in that, even being 38 years old and a seasoned waterfowl hunter. But there is part of me that just says, like, isn't this supposed to be fun?
Right.
Like,
yes.
Isn't this supposed to be like a good time?
Yeah. I forget that all the time, man. I almost need to give myself permission, because it's sometimes, if it's fun, in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm clearly not working hard enough, because I shouldn't actually have a smile on my face right now. And then you shake your head like, what are you like? Get your priorities straight, man. Like, yes, it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah. And that's my North Star when it comes to like being out there. No matter what camp I'm at, it's like, I can talk about decoy spreads and how to blow a duck call and, what's the best choke to use with whatever load of shell I'm shooting and whatever gun. That's all fun and stuff, but like that actually doesn't make like a good show. Right. It doesn't make an entertaining show. It doesn't make a show that actually people want to watch and connect with, because who talks like that? Like nobody goes to camp and talks like that. Most of the stuff that we talk about at camp, we can't even put on the show. It's all off limits. Like, this isn't HBO we're running. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I love going out into those hard pursuits, even in waterfowl hunting. Like, there's been some really tough hunts that I've been on that are like, dude, like, I don't know. I feel like this is pretty close to climbing mountains for elk and then packing one out. I mean, I'm sinking to my belly button in river mud for like this pintail. I don't know, I think what keeps me centered, even in those really kind of crappy hunts that are really hard, is like coming back to this place where like we can talk about how big I am and how much I sunk in the mud because I weigh 300. Like, it's okay. It's okay to make fun of that and make fun of yourself. I don't know. And I feel like that's what Duck Camp Dinners did really well, because naturally we were just like, my friends were like, well, so what do we do? What do we say when we're on camera? I'm like, just do you. Be yourself and it'll be a good show. Like, I knew that. And so that's that. None of that is scripted. None of that is like played up. That's like just literally who we are. We just happen to better catch it on camera. And my editor, Daniel Bagby, is genius enough to better stitch it all together somehow.
It comes across, man. So tell me how a homegrown Louisiana boy ends up in Manhattan for almost a decade.
It was all about my culinary career. Okay. So I graduated in 2006 from the John Falls Culinary Institute. I moved to California in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Napa Valley area, lived there for 2 years. I would then move to St. Thomas for 18 months. didn't take a break. I still worked in the kitchen. I actually worked two jobs there, but I just needed like all right, I'm young. I'm taking
Yeah.
myself way too seriously too early. Let me
Yeah.
just like beach it out and work at these little beach bars. And then that's when I moved to Manhattan. And really,
Okay.
I operate under this mantra of being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I do my best work when kind of I'm in situations where I'm still like in the dark, just feeling my way through things. New York was really the hammer that drove that home because
Okay.
I'd lived all these other places and I'd kind of been a chameleon evolving with them. But New York was a different beast. I own like I went from St. Thomas to New York in the end of February. And so I owned one hoodie, I owned two pairs of jeans, and then that was about all my winter clothes. And so everything had to evolve for me. And I just I love being in places that really challenge me here,
Yeah.
challenge me here. And I find that I'm a better person once I work through those challenges and I end up on the other side of it. I'm I've learned a lot from different people, from different cultures, from different working in different foods. New York was able to really do that for me. And in a big way, no matter what corner I turned, no matter what restaurant I was in, um, I had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable because all this was really new. And it made me a better cook. It made me a better person. It's made me a better husband. It made me give me a lot more perspective on other people's ways of life and being accepting of that. Um, Maybe not agreeing with it, maybe not understanding, but accepting that that's how somebody lives and wants to live and is happy living. Uh, that's it's done a lot for me. So, I went there to be on a culinary stage that was really going to challenge me. And when I left, I was a better person because of it. And that's something that I'll kind of always owe to that city, in my opinion, because it forced me just to be around people that didn't look like me or talk like me or think like me or eat like me. And it's made me a better chef too. Right. So like all those things, when we talk about culinary being an art form, I often talk to people about, okay, like think about a painter and he has this palette wheel and he has 8 colors. And as he's mixing those colors, he creates a new one or so on. And that's all like chefs do is they catalog every flavor, every smell, everything they've ever eaten in their life, and it's cataloged in their head. And then when it comes out through their hands and in the dish, it kind of flows through. And I may be from Southern Louisiana. My roots are in Cajun food and Southern food, but I cook a lot of like with a lot of Southeast Asian ingredients. It's because I've visited there so many times and I love those flavors. So I incorporate them into dishes that make me still feel like home. And those dishes have evolved. And that's just that palette wheel and those colors kind of blending together. We just catalog them in a different way. We absorb them in a different way as chefs, and they kind of come out in the plate. I think everybody kind of does that in ways, um, whether they realize it or not. Whether you're just smoking a brisket, maybe you're using sriracha as a binder because
Right.
one time you went to a Chinese restaurant and you're like, man, I really like this hot sauce. Maybe I'll use, and you start using that with mustard as a binder for your brisket. I've seen that 100 times. Like that came from somewhere, not from Kansas City. You know what I mean?
Right.
That came from somewhere else. And so we do it all the time. I'm just much more acute and aware that what I'm doing. And again, like New York that was the place for me that really helped me explore that side.
So I want to pivot a little bit. First of all, what would you okay? Let's say you want to go to Louisiana for like non-resident wants to go to Louisiana and experience like a hunt in Louisiana. What would be your recommendation for somebody's first trip to Louisiana? What time of year would it be, and what type of things would you recommend they do?
Man, that's a great question right there. Yeah, I would say early fall. I would say early fall into winter for the
Okay.
most part because if we're talking about Louisiana, what you really want to get in the nitty gritty on is South Louisiana. And what
Yeah.
you're talking about is Interstate 10 on south, and we call that the Cajun coastline. That is widely is the deviating point between the Cajun coastline and the rest of Louisiana is that interstate. And so you really, if you're going to Louisiana, you want to check out I-10 and everything south. And what you'll see is you'll see Venice, which is episode 3 and 4 and soon to be 5. Yep. You'll see Terrebonne parishes and Lafourche parishes where I'm from. And that's all those swampy cypress, blackwater marshes that, have great, we call them sockeye, y'all call them crappie, or white bass or white perch or something. We call them sockeye. And there's a bunch of great fishing in that blackwater and cypress. And then you move out west, south of I-10, you're talking big speckled-belly geese country, big rice country, big boucherie country, boudin, and so on. So a lot of the culture of Louisiana that Louisiana is known for is I-10 on south. A lot of the wildlife that you can really access is I-10 and south. Venice makes a great trip. Make sure you go with somebody that knows the area because the Mississippi River it's at its widest point. It's at its most violent point there. And it's no place for a mud boat at 3:00 in the morning with whiteout fog. But the hunting there is epic because state and federal regulations made it to where you can't use a mud boat in certain areas. And so that drops off the access for a lot of people. And you see that in episode 3 and 4, where we're piroguing and push poling into those areas, which really keeps the ducks nice and fresh, not as pressured. And again, just less people having access or wanting to access that, right, using pirogues. It's a great place because Venice, like you can, for teal season in Venice, a great teal season, which is coming up on us very soon. But in that same time, you can go flounder gigging. It's a great flounder run for gigging. It's a great snapper run in the early fall. So your access from Venice, from shooting teal to wild hog hunting to inshore and offshore fishing, it's just really no place in the state. And that's because it just goes all the way. It's so far south,
right?
In the state, there's really no place like that. But if you want to go for like this hardcore Cajun food and hardcore Cajun community, then go out west to Gaydon, to Kaplan, to Klondike, to all those rice fields in the west, and you get this really big Cajun culture where they're still speaking a lot of Cajun French.
Yep. And
they're shooting a lot of speckled-belly geese, which is one of my favorite pieces of waterfowl to hunt and definitely eat. God, I love speckled-belly geese to eat. And so I make a lot of pilgrimages out to West Louisiana just to fill my freezer for specks.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so that transitions well into my next question. How do you define Cajun cooking? Because I find it's one of those things that I can say, yeah, that's Cajun. And when I eat it, I know about the Holy Trinity. I know about the general flavor profile and some of the spices that are used. But is there an accepted definition of like what makes Cajun Cajun?
Yeah, I don't know if there's one accepted definition of what makes Cajun Cajun. I will say, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that Cajun and Creole exist in the same spectrum of food, which is not true at all, right?
Okay.
Just a short history lesson.
Please.
Louisiana's founding nations were the French, the Spanish, the Italians, the English, the Germans, the Cajuns, the Creoles, and Native Americans, right? Okay. That's what we consider the 8 founding nations. Now, the Cajun people were exiled from France, ended up in Nova Scotia and Quebec.
Yep.
Big pocket of French there. That's why that exists. That's why.
And we've got your accent too. That's the craziest thing. Like I can talk to people out east that sound like you guys.
I believe it. Now, we don't speak the same French as them because they're very traditional French. They kept that traditional French language. And as the Cajuns, at that point, they were called and went from Canadians to Acadians to Cajuns. Yep. They came all the way down the East Coast. And for some reason, they were like, oh, we love 90% humidity and mosquitoes that are size of cardinals,
let's stop here.
Like, let's settle there for whatever reason. And they did. And that's a whole different group of people.
Okay.
And Creoles mean like that term in French means many colors. That's why like Crayola crayons, that means
No
many colors.
doubt. Okay.
So that's where that word is derived from. And what that means in Creole is kind of the mix between the African Americans, the Spanish and French, and everybody that kind of started mixing in their influences. And so a
Okay.
Creole gumbo is much different from a Cajun gumbo, and a
Okay.
Creole jambalaya much different from a Cajun jambalaya. And the biggest thing that I would say is the difference is that Cajuns were an impoverished group of people. They were afflicted by like the Spanish and French thought they were uneducated. They were like lower than the lowest of the totem pole in communities and social economic issues. Their language was once outlawed to be spoken or taught in schools of Cajun French. So, and I preface that because the Cajun food is a food of poverty.
Okay.
Jambalayas in Cajun communities were like, all right, I got a pound of pork, some smoked hocks, and I have this rice. I'm going to make a jambalaya because I'll need to stretch that out. It was a lot of times it's based in game cooking because they went out and pursued game. It uses fats like lard instead of things like butter. I mean, butter was costly. It was for the rich.
Right.
So was cream, things, fresh ingredients like tomatoes and Creole. You see a lot of like tomatoes and butter and cream and using spirits to make a sauce. Cajuns, you use like you brown something, you use onions and garlic, you put water on it and made a stock and a stew. That's kind of like Cajun food is very rustic and 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 almost dirty in a sense compared to like what French would be or Creole would be or what New Orleans food would be like. So if somebody goes to Louisiana, by the way, going back to your last question, like if you go to Louisiana and you go to New Orleans, that's cool. That's great. Love New Orleans. But
Right.
spend 2 or 3 days there and then spend 2 or 3 days in the outside of New
Right.
Orleans, whether you go east or south and spend time in the other parishes because that's really to uncover Cajun food, you got to get out of the main hub of New Orleans because that any New Orleanian will tell you they don't have Cajun food in New Orleans. They have
Right.
Creole food. They have New Orleanian food of New Orleans, not Cajun food. That exists in other places.
That helps clarify a lot. So for a guy like me who likes cooking but no technical training or anything, what do you think a good first and a wild game guy? So I got bear in the freezer, I got deer and elk in the freezer. What would be a good first Cajun dish that somebody like me should cook?
Another great question. I mean, I think especially where you live right now, gumbos should be made in like every household
Okay.
of Canada because it is one of those. It's not quite a soup. It's not quite a stew. It has that hardiness. It's meant for game. I often say that Cajun food is the great equalizer of wild game. And
Right.
if you find somebody that thinks it's too gamey or too tough, if you make a gumbo with it, you'll likely be in good shape.
Right.
And so I would say, start with a gumbo, make a roux, combine flour and oil and cook it on a very low heat till it turns darker than milk chocolate. Add your Trinity and use some of those hindquarters or some of those tougher cuts,
Yep.
cube up and brown up and put in that stock and, have some good smoked sausage to cook with it. And you eat that with a little bit of rice, steamed white rice. And you have that's, don't, you know, gumbos are really, when I make a duck gumbo, I always take whole carcasses and bring them up in liquid with onion, celery, carrots, and so on, because I want that stock, right?
Right. Right.
And with gumbos, the same thing. So if you got anything like bones, or if you have a hind part that still has bone in it, like things that's just going to make a good unctuous broth,
Yeah.
that's your other key to making a great gumbo. It's not just
Okay.
about the meat. You got to have that good broth, which is
Okay.
why I approach that duck gumbo that way. And I would say with any dotty, like deer legs make great gumbos. You don't typically see that made into a gumbo. You kind of see that made into what we would call like sauce piquant or
Okay.
fricassee. Episode 2 of Duck Camp Dinners has a great sauce piquant recipe.
I
We made
remember
it
it.
with catfish because that's what we caught on jug lines.
Yep.
But that recipe exists on MeatEater's website, and you just take the catfish out and replace it with, whatever game meat we have. So a lot of times you'll see venison sauce pecans,
Yep.
rabbit sauce pecans. I'm sure your bear, elk, mule deer, and all that would work well in that too.
Great. Do you got a few more minutes? I'd like to do these rapid fire questions that we got from
Let's do
Instagram,
it.
but we're burning through it here, so I want to respect your time. The best ingredients to always have on hand when you're going hunting, and maybe make this specific to like, what do you make sure to bring in the cooler when you're going out to duck camp?
Fat and acid, whether that's lard or duck fat or butter or lemons, limes, red wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar. There's you can cook a lot of bland food with a lot of like minimal ingredients. And if you add a little couple drops of that, and that acid can come in the form of like your favorite hot sauce
Okay.
or your favorite pepper vinegar.
Yep.
But you'll hear chefs talk about that a lot as they hone their skills. Acidity is one of those things that when it really, I call it the fireworks, right? Like,
Okay.
or the treble. So fat is your base,
Yeah.
acid is your treble.
I love
They
this.
need to coexist
Yeah.
to have a good tune, right?
Yep.
And just a squeeze of lemon or a drop of apple cider vinegar in a stew or to finish off a piece of fish or a piece of barbecue even goes a long, long way. It's the reason why in North Carolina they have a vinegar barbecue sauce that they eat with whole hog. There's a reason why that exists. So I always, and it's one of those things also that in a lot of hunting camps you don't like. Nobody has apple cider vinegar or red wine vinegar, so I
Right.
always kind of put that in my cooler because I'm anticipating not having that stuff. But the other good thing about vinegar is that it's shelf stable, and so when you're at a duck camp like ours, which doesn't have refrigeration, we pack everything on coolers. It can live on the shelf with next to the Little Debbie's. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. 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 Best travel cooking setup.
Best travel cooking setup right now. I'm pretty hot on that Brio Y series that just came out. It's around 30 pounds. It burns pellets, charcoal, or split logs. It's smokeless. It has extending legs. I work with them a lot, and I've worked with them for a long time. They're made in America. And you don't need an alternative fuel source like propane or electricity to plug into. So as long as you have something to burn, it'll burn it. And it's light enough and compact enough to travel around with me. If I am talking propane, man, I like these little Loco griddles that hook up to the 1 pound propane tank. You can get you get the extension for your 20-pound tanks.
Yep. Yep.
But just a griddle in general, whether you're cooking that over live fire or it's a propane connection or electric connection, it gives you a lot of versatility with griddles. So I would say one of those two.
Okay. Love it. Two-part, favorite way to cook big game and favorite way to cook waterfowl.
Yeah, I mean, my advice on this is they kind of are this. My advice is the same whether it's waterfowl or big game. There's certain cuts where you want to cook it rare, medium, like a good speckle belly goose breast. Never wants to be over medium unless it's going into a gumbo where you're cooking it till it falls apart. And the biggest mistake a lot of people make is they even overcook it or they don't cook it enough. Right. So like once you go past, if I got a backstrap or a loin, right? If for some reason I forget about it on the smoker in the oven and it goes to well done, I'm just cooking it longer until it falls apart and making it into a stew.
Right.
Right. Like, so there's certain waterfowl, like a nice rice fed mallard breast, right? Like you want to render that fat down in a cast iron skillet, cook it no more than medium. If you do go over medium, put it in the gumbo pot and cook it till it falls apart. Like there's no middle ground with wild game, in my opinion. It's even that mid-rare medium, or it's falling off the bone. It's becoming a stew or a braise or something like that.
Okay. Love it. What's your favorite blind snack?
Man, I'm gonna get so much shit for this. I like I like raisins. It's so lame. I always have the box of little sun-made raisins in my
Yeah,
kit.
yeah, the little red ones.
Yep, all my friends make fun of me about it. But I like raisins and salted cashews, and a lot of times I'll have both of those and eat them simultaneously, like you would put M&Ms in popcorn. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I love a little Debbie snack, but I do. One of the things that any waterfowl hunter will tell you is that we eat like crap during the season, and it's probably because we're on the road a lot. And so I like to have my blind snacks at least like something somewhat healthy,
Right.
because I know I'm probably not going to eat great whether I'm on the road or at the camp.
Okay. Any tips for people on how to hunt ducks without decoys or dogs? And I think this may be people who aren't as established. You know what I mean? Like maybe
Yeah.
they're just getting into it and they don't have a big
Yeah.
spot and a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. I think so. There's two things that any waterfowl hunter needs to do, whether you have all that gear or not, and that's the scout. You
Okay.
need to go out to the place where you think you want to hunt and sit there in the morning before the season or during the week, maybe when you can't hunt, and just sit there and watch where birds are flying. Watch their flight patterns. Keep note on what the air temperature is, where your wind is, how much cloud coverage you have, and if you can do enough scouts to get a kind of a random set of those environments. When you go out on a Saturday or Sunday, whenever you choose, and it's overcast, you know where those birds are kind of the flight patterns are at. After that, if you can manage to get where the birds want to be, it doesn't matter what your decoy setup is. It doesn't even matter what you have. If they want to be there, they're going to come, decoys or not. Then after that, it has to do with your hide. And that, what I mean by that is like your blind or how you're going to stay camouflaged or hidden. So it doesn't mean you have to build a blind, but you got to find some natural vegetation to wade in or to hide in and to get really good coverage because like we say this all the time, like the kind of camouflage doesn't matter if you don't have a good hide. And
Right.
it's just not gonna, that's why in the old days they hunted in flannels and blue jeans because they
Yeah.
understood the importance of having a good blind or a good hide setup.
I love it. Favorite wood chip to use with duck?
Wood chip?
Yeah.
Like a cooking wood chip?
I think so. Like when I think of my pellets, I think of like a hickory pellet or something
Yeah.
like that. So maybe he means like a smoked flavored wood chip or something.
Traditionally, game people like to smoke game with fruit woods. So think
Okay.
peach wood chips, cherry wood chips, apple wood chips.
Okay.
Personally, I like to do a little mix because I like the pungentness of like things like mesquite or hickory mixed
Yep.
in. So fruit woods tend to be a little more subtle, a little less punchy, where mesquite and hickory can get over the top. So I like to cut them and use a mix. So I would say if you go traditional, it would be a fruit wood, like I mentioned. But if you want to get a little more punch, especially if you're making things like duck ham or goose ham, goose pastrami, or any type of um, any game like that, whether it's waterfowl or not, have a little bit of a punchier hardwood in there, like hickory or mesquite.
Okay. I love that. I'm going to steal that tip actually. Any tips on how to age venison at home he says without a proper cooler, but I'm assuming he means like a walk-in cooler. Like if you couldn't, do you got any hacks on how to manage?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can age it. I mean, you're at this point you're talking about, subprimal pieces like whole loins or whole roast or something like that.
Yep.
You can do it in your fridge, just in your conventional fridge. However, the humidity and temperature is not like correct as a dry ager. So it's going to take a lot longer and it's going to take you kind of doing some like little hacks in your fridge to do it. So first of all, like let's take a loin, whether it's a backstrap or a full loin or a section of a loin or something. What you want to do is make sure it's really dry before you go ahead and put that in. But you want to get that onto a sheet pan with a sheet rack so it can sit and have airflow going in and all around it.
Okay.
It helps if you don't have it in a fridge where you have like vegetables or fruits or dairy products because those have microbes and bacteria that is good for them, bad for meat, especially when it's
Right.
exposed to air. So if you can have a separate fridge for it, better. If you have a whole leg, then you want to hang that. You want to better hang it in your fridge somehow. So you're going to want to build like a little kind of a trellis rack to where you can butcher tie it and hang it. And it's going to take a little longer to age something in that because it's colder than a conventional aging fridge, and the humidity isn't quite right. So it's going to take you a lot longer, and it may take you like putting like a little aluminum tray of water in there just to increase the humidity, increase that moisture airflow. There's a lot of DIY hacks on the internet that I would suggest you look up because those dry aging fridges that have come out, which are super cool, can be pretty pricey, and but there are ways to do it in the fridge.
Awesome.
To that point, I would say
Yeah.
like if you can, especially like waterfowl, I love to age ducks, and I
Okay.
age them like all I do is hang them by the neck in the fridge for a week if I can, and then I break them all down. I don't touch them. They stay feathered. They stay guts in them. If you can hang them for 3 days a week in refrigeration or even outside if it's cold enough and not freezing, it really will change. It really will change the waterfowl, and it's no different from our beef in America. Like no beef you eat is less than like 40 days aged,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
In the grocery store. And then steakhouses will age it for another 60 or 120 or whatever. And so that should tell you something about when you're eating fresh game. If you can age it for a day, 5 days, 7 days when it comes to waterfowl, do it. It's a really good, not everybody has that access to do that.
Sure.
But if you can, I would go for it. And I would say the same for whitetails do too. If you have a fridge, a walk-in fridge that you can hang them from, gut them, leave the fur, leave the hide on, and let them age for 5 days. They'll be easier to clean, and the meat will firm up and become
Okay.
way more tender. And all kind of good things happen when you age animal properly.
Okay. That's great, man. I have a basement fridge too. That's all, never has anything but like, some drinks and stuff in it. So it's perfect for that type of stuff. Best practices for searing duck breasts.
Yep. So my favorite way to do this is if you're in a fatty area, like I mentioned, these fat, like corn-fed mallards, they have these nice thick fat caps. Then that's a good way. I like to start in a cold pan with just like no oil. Like I'll put oil in my pan and then take a paper towel and just wipe the
Yep.
bottom of it. And I'll start in a cold pan. I'll score the breast, not to go all the way to the meat, just very lightly score it, which means just cutting very shallow incisions and almost a crosshatch into the fat section. And then I'll start in a cold pan, and I'll just turn that fire on very low. And I'll just let that fat render down. As it renders, you can pour off some of the fat and keep on rendering. And then from there, what I like to do is once I feel like my fat cap is rendered enough, I've collected some of that duck fat to save for scrambled eggs or whatever I want. Then I'll throw in I'll turn that heat up. I'll flip it over. I'll turn that heat up, add a big old knob of good butter, crushed garlic, thyme, salt, and cracked pepper. And then I'll baste that duck in that fat and aromatics until I hit that medium rare, which is about 125 degrees if you want to use an internal temp, till I hit that medium rare. And then I'll let it rest for 10 minutes. And then you slice it, and that's money. That's money right there.
I love it. Okay, couple left. This guy's from the Bayou, but he lives in the mountains now. Is it just me, or do deer in Louisiana have a stronger flavor?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I talked a little bit about that marsh deer
Yeah.
that we have in Louisiana. And, with every living organism, it takes on a lot of what it eats, right? And, corn-fed mallards look different from rice-fed mallards when you get them in Louisiana. It changes just from that little section. So I can totally see that. We talk a lot about that. We remember as kids, our dads and our dads coming home with like a deer and a big a big igloo cooler back in the day, and
Yeah.
it's on raw ice, and they just let it sit there on ice for 3 days to try to purge some of that gaminess out of it. And we didn't realize it at the time. We thought that was the way you're supposed to deal with venison, but
Yeah.
I think they were doing that because they were trying to really clean kind of whatever those big, strong, wild flavors were that seemed to be customary of swamp deer in Louisiana.
Yeah.
But in the same way, like if we knew what we knew now, and if I shot that same deer today, I would go ahead and age it in a fridge if I can and get that same thing. And I bet you the meat would surely be in a lot better condition after dry hanging it in cold. But also it would lose a lot of that flavor. But I think so much of that is just due to diet. And that's just with any living organism. What it consumes ends up being something that, you're going to end up tasting in the meat.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, last one. Best way to clean a waterfowl breast from feathers and bloodshot, along with how you freeze it.
I mean, there's a strong case to always pluck your birds. For some people that's not worth it. Well, maybe you're shooting 100 snow geese.
Right.
Maybe you just have like, a few teal or whatever. But I would always say if you can, pluck your birds. That's that skin, even if they don't have a lot of fat on them, really insulates the meat and really protects it from over drying and overcooking and from the harshness of a sear or a grill. That's what that skin does. And so even if it's not giving you the fat that those big mallards might have, it does have some cooking properties that you want to take advantage of. Let's see, as far as cleaning them goes, like, once it's plucked and gutted, you can't really get the shot out unless you take that breast portion off the breastbone and then are able to, let's see, I saw a trick the other day. You can tell where the shot goes through because it'll push the feathers literally into the meat. And so, really pulling that feather out and kind of searching through there with your finger or with like a toothpick is helpful. But really, I don't really bother with the shot too much. Number of reasons, like the shell and I shoot some pretty nice shells. Not everybody can do that, but they've come so far that you don't get a lot of shot in waterfowl anymore because they meant to go clean through and just kind of crush.
Yep.
But I don't have great advice on the shot thing. I would say just be careful when you're chomping down on the meat. When you're hunting any kind of game with BBs, because even if you're being careful and trying to get all that shot out, I guarantee you missed one somewhere.
Sure.
And you don't want a fun day hunting to turn into a $5,000 dentist appointment.
Yeah.
So just
No
be
doubt.
careful what you chew. I like to call them duck pearls. That's what I call them. So it's kind of like good luck if you get a duck pearl.
I love it. Listen, Jean-Paul, this has been a blast, man. I toss it back over to you. Maybe let everybody know where they can follow you, where they can see all your stuff, maybe any plans you got coming up. Mike is yours.
Yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram at Chef Jean. That's JEAN_Paul. I do my best to answer all these direct messages. I get a lot of cooking questions. So I'll be happy to try to answer yours if they're like nice and concise and to the point. Not for full recipes. That's a little bit harder, but I would urge everybody listening to reach out if you have some extra questions as they come out hearing this episode. Shoot them to me and I'll do my best to answer them. You can watch Duck Camp Dinner Season 2 on the MeatEater YouTube channel. We got episodes 1 through 4 out right now. They come out every Friday at 12 o'clock Central Time. So tune in this Friday for episode 5. It's going to be a good one. There's also Season 1 on there, which is one that we kind of self-produced and self-shot. And it's a good time. So check it out. It gives you a good reference of where this show came from. We do intend on shooting a Season 3, and it's looking like it's going to be in the Chesapeake Bay. So I'm really excited about that because you got the birthplace of North America waterfowl hunting, meeting the birthplace of America in a lot of ways, and all that history and food that goes into that area. I think is going to be a really cool opportunity to highlight those people, the region, and those foodways and that history in a really fun way. But that's it. You can check out my website at jeanpaulbourgeois.com. That has just kind of some of my favorite gear that I like to use, a little bit about me, links to the episodes, and so on. But other than that, it's all duck camp dinners all day long these days.
Well, Jean-Paul, I can't thank you enough, man. That was really enjoyable, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And yeah, man, thanks again.
I appreciate it, sir. Thanks for having me, man. I enjoyed that as well. It's always fun.
All right, man. We'll catch you later. Have a good day.
See ya. You too. Bye.
All right, guys. Well, there you have it. Chef Jean-Paul Bourgeois, who is now a full-blown MeatEater contributor, and you can see all of his stuff on the MeatEater YouTube channel. I also recommend following his Instagram. As always, if you could engage with the platform, it would be greatly appreciated. Like, comment, share, subscribe, maybe go give Jean-Paul a follow. Let him know that you heard about him on the Mindful Hunter podcast. That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, thanks for tuning in.